Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Demystifying Money. Today, we're going to talk about grant opportunities. I know this is something that people might not know too much about unless they've actually been directly involved in it, but it is a very interesting opportunity, especially financially, if you're looking to raise funds or to complete a project or anything that you're looking to do. To get creative about funding is sometimes a really, really valuable skill to learn. So I'm here with Melissa J. Pond. She's the founder of Melissa J. Pond LLC, and she's an expert in grant writing and strategic planning when it comes to raising money in the nonprofit space. She's in Abington, Massachusetts, so she's a local girl. So thank you, Melissa, so much for joining me today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
This episode of Demystifying Money with Misty Lynch is proudly sponsored by Soundview Financial Advisors. Visit www.soundviewfinancialadvisors.com to learn more.
Tell me about your experience getting to, founding your company. Did you have experience in the nonprofit? What kind of appealed to you about that? And describe maybe the career path for somebody who might be listening and curious about, how to get into that space.
Absolutely. It's been an interesting journey. So I came down to Massachusetts. I'm originally from Maine to go to Eastern Nazarene College, and I was studying business management. I got an internship with the municipality and in their community development office. So I was managing federal grants on behalf of them, like millions of dollars in U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development funding. And I did that for 15 years. And while there, I also got my master's degree from Northeastern University in nonprofit management. And the reason I got it in nonprofit management was because I was working with nonprofit organizations who do public services in our community. So that was where the grant money that I was focused on in particular was to these nonprofits. And I really enjoyed working with them, and I really wanted to figure out how to help build their capacity and also increase community impact with what they were doing. And so I got really excited about capacity building and how that works. So that's that strategy component. And then when I left that job and I started networking and throwing my skills out there, I just branded myself as my name. I had Liz Teresa do my logo, my brand kit, and I'm just going to introduce myself as Melissa J. Pond LLC. My business card, I still have it. It has like all of the different skills I have. And I was just putting myself out there, and like everyone was saying they want grant writing. So whether it was, a government agency that they knew of, so I got to do a great project right here in Abington for the town right off the bat in 2023. I helped them raise money for a bridge, and then working with, the women's entrepreneur groups. That's one of my favorite things to do, working in Boston Business Women. And helping them with grants for small businesses has been really fun as well. And then, circling back to the nonprofits, this is a really interesting space, particularly right now. And it's really exciting to be working with the nonprofits and helping them pivot, basically, pivot and find new solutions to problems. We can't keep doing things the way they were doing them in the 80s and 90s and even early 2000s. So we have to find new ways of doing things, being creative, really telling our story well, and going after different types of grants. So it's not just government grants. There's foundation grants, there's government grants, there's state, municipal. So really, and even corporate grants.
So when you talk about, because I think this could be something to start with, because I think there's a lot of confusion about like what grants are and why is someone giving grant money away, say like a corporation. Like people somewhat understand the federal side of it, but it is in the news lately, and it's something people are seeing a lot more of, and there might be some confusion. So in the most basic terms, what is a grant? Why would an entity offer a grant? So people who are thinking about ways to potentially get grants really understand the other side of the coin.
So organizations giving grants, that way they help solve a problem that they can't do themselves. So they're partnering and collaborating with another organization that can solve that problem, that's closer to the people on the ground who need that solution. And so when I talk to organizations about their grant writing, I also kind of back up and say like, well, what problem are you trying to solve? Every organization exists to solve a problem, whether you're business or nonprofit, you exist to solve a problem. And so if you're in that nonprofit space specifically, um, are you bringing all the right people to the table to have that conversation? And because funders are going to look at that, they're going to look at who's involved in your process, who's on your board, um, who are you serving? So, of like, have you brought the right stakeholder group together? So that's really important. And the other piece is, are you really clear about how you're solving that problem? So one of the other key pieces of grant writing that I help a client when I'm onboarding them is with their logic model, which means the resources they have, what resources do they have, what resources are they looking for, how does that translate into activities, outputs, outcomes, and ultimately community impact.
Okay, so that's definitely helpful for people to understand that it is basically like you have to have a lot of clarity around what you do, how you solve this problem, what the plan is, because this is a very competitive space. Because when it comes to, to grants, I think that it is very, I think some of us might think of it back to when we were getting student loans and like some people were like, oh, why bother? I'm not going to apply for these grants because it's going to be a little bit of effort or work. But what are some of the things that, these, you mentioned the bridge in Abington. So for some of these nonprofits, grant money is basically, it's going to keep them alive, right? I mean, if they're operating that way. So how often, when you talk with your clients, do you help them figure out where they should go or where they should look to apply for these grants and where they are? Because if they might not know exactly where to find them.
Yeah, I think every organization is in a completely different place. And so that's what I try to figure out as soon as I'm on the phone with them. But I found that everyone sort of consistently can fall into this package that I created. I call it the Grant Success Launchpad. And I'll do exactly what I was just talking about earlier, the stakeholder mapping, the logic model piece. I also revisit like what's their mission and their vision, specifically focusing on what problem are you trying to solve. So getting that foundational language done for them. Even organizations that have been around a long time, like still need to go back and revisit that. That's kind of the strategy piece too. Like you should constantly be revisiting your strategy like every 3 years. Like you don't want to do it like you want to be revisiting your strategy every year, but you need time to like see how that strategy is playing out. So 3 years is a really good amount of time to look at your strategy and see what's going on. So that's why that package like works well for organizations that have been around a long time and organizations that are just starting out, because you always need to be revisiting your strategy, thinking about what problem you're solving and how you're doing that. And do you have the right people at the table? Um, the other piece is um, with the business ones, um, it's the same thing. Like I'm also doing that for them. So they don't need to do the logic model. They don't need to do the stakeholder mapping as much. It's pretty much straight. It's more straightforward. It's just like the difference between setting up an LLC and a nonprofit. LLC is a lot easier than managing a nonprofit. And the same is true when you're doing the grants. Managing small business grants are easier than managing nonprofit grants. And so that process is a lot more simple. And right now, what I'm finding for the small business grants is there's a lot of corporations who are creating marketing programs as a small business grant program, which is really fun and interesting. And it's a win-win, right? Because they're getting in front of grant small business grant seekers and they're getting in front of the audience of that small business. So once that winner is announced, now they have the audience of that
Mhm.
small business grantee as well. So that's really exciting. And then where do I look for the nonprofit grants? I have a database called Instrumental, and I absolutely love it. I found out about it last year.
Mhm.
Before that, I was using some other databases. Instrumental is like the cream of the crop, and it's expensive. There's definitely a cost
Mhm.
to it. But I find that it is like the most effective and efficient one to search for these grants. It's a great database. And so normally, I'm just looking for the top 3 to 5 for a client, but I had a client come back to me earlier this week and I went through and I was like, okay, I'm going to find every single thing I can for this client. Like, let's see what's in this
Mhm.
database. Like, let's really dig in and see. Because we had already done that 3 to 5 package. So I was like, what else is in here? And so I combed through over, like, it had produced about 200 grants. And then you kind of have to filter through at that point and see what's in there. And so started filtering through and narrowed it down to like 30 that are like a good start. And then from there, you still have to like dig in even further. So you can't just rely on the database. You have to like go in and dig around, find out more information, find out how much they actually give, to see if it's worth applying for. I don't like to apply for nonprofits. I don't like to go after grants that are anything less than 10,000 because the work you're putting in, it's really not worth
Yeah.
anything less than that. The admin you put in, the kind of work you put in, the collaborations you need to seek out to do this grant work. Like you really don't want to go after anything less than $10,000.
Who would those grants be appropriate for, those smaller ones, or are those mostly, just do they have an audience that might make sense for that?
So it's really hard to get grants if you're just starting out.
Yeah.
So I always tell clients to really focus on getting a really good board in place.
Mhm.
And you know, so those are the types that could go after those smaller grants to
Mhm.
answer your question. But this is a good place to interject this as well, is that I like to tell them to get a really strong board in place and not just people who are going to rubber stamp what this executive director wants to do. These board members really need to be uh, engaged in a way that they're willing to give their own funds to the organization and also go ask their friends for money too.
Mhm.
So that way they're building an initial budget and then they're able to show an organization what they've done with the money they have, that there are people invested, that this is a proven concept. And then investors are willing to say, okay, I like what you're doing. I want to help you scale. I want to help you have a bigger community impact. I think one of the myths out there and why I like the name of your show, Demystifying Money, I think there's a huge myth out there that like once you create a 501(c)(3, a nonprofit organization, money is just going to fall from the sky and
Yeah,
into your lap and
exactly.
help you accomplish these community impact goals that you want to do just because you are now a
Sure.
501(c)(3. And that just isn't true.
Mhm.
It takes a tremendous amount of work from you and from your board and from your volunteers to create an environment that shows a proven concept. And in that way, it's very much similar to a small business. You have to prove your
Mhm.
concept, right, before people are even willing to, buy what you're
Mhm.
selling or invest in your business.
Yeah, no, and I think another myth that that people might think is that these grants, have no obligations, that it's just kind of free money, it's given to you, and you like maybe you don't have to pay it back like a loan. But what are some of the things that that grantors expect to see? What are some of the things that people can expect if they want to go down this fundraising path?
So federal, though this is like going to be completely different conversation in the next couple of years, federal traditionally has had the most strings attached because
Mhm.
they have to answer to Congress, they have to answer to the American public. So government grants usually have the most strings involved. And then foundations, some of them are really listening to people. And I really appreciate the active listening they're doing to the constituents that they're trying to serve. And they're making changes to how much paperwork is involved. But I think at the same end, like you need to be able to prove what you're doing with the money, right? You need to be able to show that. And I always like as a grant reviewer, like I look at their website and what their web presence is, and is that matching what they're showing on a grant application? Like, is this really what they're trying to accomplish? I think there is this element out there where it's called mission creep, where people see a grant opportunity and they just sort of like, oh, we could do that. But it has like absolutely nothing to do with what their organization
Mhm.
exists to do. And that's very problematic. And so funders usually can see through that. Um, and so going back to like paperwork and strings attached, that all kind of comes full circle, right? Like there's goals attached to this funding typically. there's not just this pool of money that exists to go to a 501(c)(3). There's different pools of money that are created for different purposes. And
Okay.
so they have an obligation to their board members and their trustees that this money is going to what they wanted it to go to. So there often are reporting elements and things like that, specifically in the nonprofit sector. For the small business grants, this always looks different. I think every small business grant will look different.
Mhm.
Most of them, I think, don't require a lot.
Mhm.
There was one that one of my clients won a $25,000 grant, and that was specifically for capacity building. So I'm sure, I wasn't involved in the implementation of that, but I'm sure there was some kind of paperwork that was involved to show where that money went, that it did go to, capacity building within our organization.
But that's a substantial amount of money. So I think this can be really, for especially the small businesses. I know a lot of people listening are small business owners. That's substantial. So what are some of the other things that people might not know that they could apply for grants for to help them do in their business? That maybe they have a lot of different things that they'd like to do, but they just don't know how to make it work financially.
I think that marketing piece is like one of the biggest ones, and I have a lot of like creative marketing colleagues who send me their clients because they're just all that marketing has a cost, right? And it's all really important, and hopefully it will pay for itself. But at the end of the day, it's like there's a website and there's a networking fee and there's, not to mention your insurance and your phone and all the things that you need just to run your business. And so I think that marketing component is a great one when, there's grants
Yeah.
available for that. A lot of them are just very generic. Like a lot of
Mhm.
them don't say like what you have to do with the money. It's just a matter of, we all know running small businesses is a lot of work and takes a lot of money to run them. Um, and everybody wants these small businesses to succeed, I think,
Yeah.
like and so I think it's amazing that a lot of corporations are putting money out there to help support these small businesses.
You mentioned before about mission creep, and I want to go back to that. Do you help businesses because maybe, um, you know, most probably have a strong idea of what they do, but for some that maybe have experienced that feel like, oh, we can go for this, we could do this. Because I think I've seen that, kind of mentality before because it's like, oh my gosh, this is a big grant. How do we make it work? And so do you help people kind of identify or kind of make sure that they have those clear objectives if it has gotten a little muddy with everything that they've done?
Yeah, so when I revisit their vision and mission statements, I have a formula that I use to like comb through that. And it's really just different parts of speech, right? Verb, like who are you helping? Like really kind of like working that out and being really clear. Some organizations, when they write their mission and vision statements, they're trying to write a speech, right?
Mhm.
And that's not what a mission and vision statement is. It doesn't need to be a speech that you post to your website. It needs to be like really, really simple so that even your board members know what that is right off the top of their head. And I think the formula really helps too, because if somebody can remember the formula that I give them, they can also be like, and what did we say about our business? Or they could even like change it out. They could like swap it out when they're talking about it, and they still can clearly articulate what their organization is trying to do. Um, and I think when I'm combing through grants, I also like to be really clear about like what this organization is doing and how this grant will help them.
Mhm.
Um, so so that's how I help them, is like both with really getting clear about what their mission is and then finding the right grants for them. If they're finding them on their own, I like to just kind of walk them through. I have like a mission creep mapping
Mhm.
tool, and it's
Yeah.
just like it follows the formula. So it says like, are you like, does this grant meet this part of your mission? Does the grant meet this part of your mission and this part of your mission? If yes, move forward. If no, really take a step back and think about that before you move forward with this.
Yeah, I think it's smart that you're going through that. I think that's a smart exercise for a lot of business owners, especially, even self-employed people who are like, I can help this person, I can help this person. And then it's kind of like, well, who do you help when someone asks for clarity? And it's like everybody, or if I was to say anybody with financial issue, like that is the world, or even some people, oh, I help
Yeah.
women, which is half the population, like getting really clear on like who you're very, very good at helping or what you're trying to do. I think it makes it easier. Like I think about it from the other side of getting them to approve this grant for you. The clearer you are, the more organized you are, the easier it is for them to be like, yes, like this one makes sense instead of trying to back into it. Are there some pitfalls or things that people can avoid when it comes to making mistakes with this process, as far as the applications? Because um, I feel like if you do what they want and they're
Hmm.
clear,
Hmm.
you might have a chance, but there's got to be a lot of ways that this could go sideways.
Yeah, it's definitely a competitive process, and you never know who's reading the grant application behind the scenes.
Mhm.
So I serve on a grant allocations committee for the United Way in our local area, and I love it. And we're in the process of it right now. So I can't name names by any means, but I would say from last year, one of the biggest pitfalls I saw people make was the way that they wrote up their budget. Um, people were not Organizations were not clear about like making their revenue and their expenses equal.
Mm.
And that's like really important. So we had one that submitted that they looked like they didn't even need the money. They were asking for an increase of the allocation they received from the year before, but then their balance was showing that they had $20,000 more than they needed.
Mm.
And so I pointed that out to them, like th this is incredibly important. Like
Yeah.
make sure you have somebody who understands a financial document, like a P&L.
Mhm.
Look at this before you're submitting it with a grant, because then with the reviewers, we're looking at it going, they don't need our money.
They don't need it.
They have $20,000 they don't know what to do with.
Mhm.
But they're telling us there's this need and they're telling us that this money is there. The other problem I see is that in the nonprofit space, it's really, really hard to predict how much money is going to come in, right? So there's a line item where they're saying, we're going to get this much in grants and donations. And then it's like, but how are you getting that? Like, are you
Yeah.
sure you're going to get those grants? Are you sure those donations are going to come through?
Mhm.
So that can be incredibly tricky. But I think if you're really clear about why and how, so for example, we're looking at that and saying, um, okay, so your year over year budget, you're saying this year you're going to get a lot more in grants and donations. Why is that? And they had a great explanation for it. And I was like, that's awesome. Okay. Okay. I hear that.
Yeah.
And other times, um, one of the other big pitfalls is people hire a grant writer, but they don't work together with that grant writer. So my my preferred work style is collaboration. I want to work with my client and make sure we're completely on the same page. In some organizations, they just want to hire a grant writer like to delegate everything to. Like you go get this done for me. And it really doesn't work like that. The grant writer needs to be more integrated into the organization. Um, on the marketing level to make sure that the web presence matches what you're doing with the grant writing, on the strategic level to make sure your strategy matches what you're doing. And so that's incredibly important. And so one of the things I've seen in grant allocation review committees is an organization hired a grant writer to write it for them, and we're reviewing it. And then we show up to the site visit and we're talking to them and like, something's not quite lining up here. And then we ask about like, oh, well, our grant writer wrote this. Where,
Mm.
okay, does your grant writer know about your organization? Well, our grant writer lives in Florida and like they have never been here. They don't really know this well enough. And then it's like, did they work on your budget? Like, is it clear about like your budget? Like, so then that was like, I mean, that throws up like a huge red flag to a
Mhm.
grant review committee too. Is like, if you just hired a grant writer to delegate it to and get it done for you, but you never even like reviewed it, you never really reviewed it to see if it actually is what you wanted to say before you're submitting it. I think a lot of funders can see right through that too.
Yeah. No, and I think I've said it before in the podcast that a confused mind will say no. And so if it is confusing to the person who's saying, this doesn't look right, or when I looked at your website, none of this, I mean, that is definitely, even if they're not exactly sure what's wrong, like you said, something seemed off, that is not going to be where they feel safe putting their funds. It's just not. So I think that's important. Are you able to work with clients that are not geographically near you if you get the right information, or is it something that it is more of a local type of business?
Absolutely. I'm very comfortable working with organizations all across the country, and that's because I have a method of, right from the beginning, I'm saying like, we need to collaborate together on this. Like
Mhm.
I'm not, you can't just ask me to
Do it.
just get this done for you. Like there needs to be conversations.
Mhm.
I want to be comfortable submitting this on your behalf because my name's on it, you
Mhm.
know? And then there's those other pieces of like wanting to make sure that that grant gets submitted from the organization and not from my Gmail account, right?
Mhm.
Like, or
Yeah.
my melissajpond.com email address. Like,
Yes.
that's not going to look good for the funder. And so oftentimes, if it is something where they want to hire me to help submit it, like I ask to get integrated into the organization. So ask for a branded email account, and being part of their team and having like, at least biweekly check-in meetings with the team to know what's going on and be like fully integrated into what's going on. That's incredibly important. So for example, like I was just working with an organization down in Florida. And so, we had the check-in meeting with the board. We were able to, I created that, what I call my grant success launch pad, the 3 to 5 grants.
Mhm.
We had that ready. And it's such a great starting point because then it's like, then you have the conversations. I can, use that, then create a clear checklist and say, okay, like here's all the things we need to do to get these submitted. And then have that conversation with the organization, either the staff and or the board, and say like, how are we moving these things forward? Do you want me to do X? Do you want me to do Y? Who's doing this? And like be able to kind of move through that implementation piece.
So you're sort of project managing this whole process for them because you're making sure, like, even just by defining those first 3 to 5 versus whatever is out there, like having it be this unlit or this kind of, well, we're just going to go for everything, like having that be kind of cleared. But you mentioned with checklists and talking with the boards and all of those things, um, it really does seem to solve that the confusion or that stress of who's
Hmm.
going to do what and making sure that it's actually done. So I think that it's such a helpful thing because like you said, some of these nonprofits, like you know, they're working really hard. They have all these different things that they need to do. And so I think having that really not just be seen as just the grant writer, but like the grant like manager, like
Manager.
team is
Yeah.
very,
Yeah.
very it's just a different way to look at it that I think is really successful. Are there any times, any experiences you've had with some clients that you've felt really, really good about how you've been able to have an impact on their business?
Absolutely. They're one of the organizations I worked with. They won a $625,000 grant over 5 years. And this
Wow.
was a federal one. So unfortunately, I'm not sure what's going on with that and how that's going to play out over the next 5 years, which is incredibly sad. But that was definitely my biggest win in my
Wow.
business so far, was working with them and getting and helping them get that done. I was incredibly confident that they had it. Like this is the thing, is that you can't just hire a grant writer and expect that now you're going to get the money. Like your organization needs to be prepared for these opportunities too. So, like I said, like having a board, having your budgets, your budget set up and like um a really clear plan for what your organization does. And this organization was incredibly positioned. It had been their goal to get this grant. So I'm not trying to pat myself on the back too much for this. Like the
And
organization
you
had
mentioned the
prepared themselves.
collaboration. Like that's a
Yeah,
team effort to get that kind of funding secured is definitely
exactly.
a whole team. And that's a
Exactly. But that's the point I want to
requirement.
drive home, that
Yeah,
this is about
absolutely.
collaboration. Like I don't want
But
people to
if
listen to the podcast and be like,
everybody's,
Melissa can get me a $625,000 grant. Like that's not what I'm saying, and that's not what I want people to
yeah,
hear. I want people to hear that it does take collaboration, and that but the value that I added to that was I had a 15-year career in federal grant management. So I knew what some of the things that they needed to like look at, and be clear about, and how to write in a really clear way, right?
yeah,
And like that grant writing piece does come into play. How do we tell our story really well? How do we draw out the things that like we want the grant reviewer to see, and make sure they're seeing really clear. And also that logic model, making sure that even if a funder doesn't ask for a logic model, making sure that that shines throughout the narrative is incredibly important. Like, can the reader really understand how the resources you have combined with the resources they're giving you are going to clearly make an impact based on the activities and outputs you're doing?
yeah. I mean, that's outstanding, but it is important. But it just shows that it's possible if you have the right team in place, if your board is, if everyone is committed, like if this was a big, if this is a big goal of yours to get, big get funding,
Hmm.
it can happen. If you get everything in place. Are you starting to see, because I'm guessing, even talking to people who are like wanting to apply for college scholarships, thinking like, oh, I'll just, put it in ChatGPT and send it out to the rest of the world. They're catching on to this, right? Like this is where I feel like having that strong writing skills will help. The humans will still benefit, I think. Am I right
Yes,
here?
yes, absolutely. I think it's incredibly important. I play with those tools a lot to see
Mhm.
what they're producing and like see what's going on and how to use them effectively in my own business. But at the end of the day, you need to know how to write and you need to
Yeah.
know how to produce a good paper. Talking about, the college scholarships
Mhm.
piece. I've taught higher education and um, we want we want our college students to be able to know how to write a sentence, right? Write a proper sentence, write a proper paragraph. ChatGPT is like not going to do that well. It's just regurgitating information that I can find online and spitting it out. And it can be used as an incredible tool. Like I
Yeah, it's a
said,
tool.
I do use it in my business, but I
Yeah.
use it as a tool. I don't
Right.
have it just produce something for me. And I think that's a dangerous avenue to go down
Mhm.
with grants as well, because just like I said, if you're hiring a grant writer in Florida who doesn't really know your organization and they're just producing something without even collaborating with you, that's the same result you're going to get from ChatGPT. You're putting stuff in and it's not going to spit out exactly what you need. It's going to be haphazard.
It's gonna be very generic. Yeah, no, I agree. I was just curious seeing with that. Finally, I have a question for you, which I'm not sure. But I know that there's a lot of us who, want to help raise money for different charities. And maybe it's not a grant, but I feel like there's a ton of people listening who probably have a huge aversion to asking anybody for money or for help. I know I'm on the board for like Walpole Youth Basketball. And to me, I get what we do. And I think it's really cool and important. And it's pretty easy for me to ask somebody to help us out with it. But I talk about money all the time.
Yeah.
So it doesn't,
Yeah.
what are some things that you think can help people who maybe have some fears about either going for big grants or asking anybody for help or money, period? What are some things that can help make that a little bit easier?
That's to me, that's such an easy question. It's truly believing in your mission and your cause. If you truly believe in your mission and your cause and you know that it's going to make a huge difference for people, why wouldn't you ask your
Yeah.
neighbor? Why wouldn't you ask everyone you know to contribute? Why wouldn't you tap every resource you can possibly find and ask for help with that mission? If you truly believe that what you're doing, how you're doing it, what problem you're solving is truly gonna make a difference, it's a no-brainer. You're going to be asking everyone you know for money. I think what comes into play, especially for new board members, for example, is if they're not integrated into the organization enough and they're just, they were just asked because somebody knew somebody and they got asked to sit on the board and they're not that comfortable because they haven't really gotten to know what the organization does yet, or they're not clear on how to talk about it, how to talk about the mission and vision of the
Mhm.
organization, and how to resonate that with someone. So, and it's also a lot about relationship building too. Like if when you're asking for money, you don't want to just walk up to somebody and ask them for money. Like, and even if you already know them, you don't want to just like blankly just be like, just point blank, like, hey, I need money for my organization or it's going to fall apart. Like,
Yeah.
that's one of the worst things to say is that the need is that your organization won't exist without it. Because the need is the problem in society or the problem, whatever problem you're trying to solve. It's not that your organization doesn't have any money. So that's one of the biggest pitfalls I see people
Yeah.
make is like, well, I really need money or my organization's going to fall apart. It's like the first thing I think of personally, or even as like thinking of it as a funder is like, what your organization probably doesn't have the capacity to be existing.
Mm.
So why would I
Yeah.
give you my money? You know what I mean? And
To keep
so
the doors open another couple of months. That to me doesn't sound like exciting
no,
or
no. The need should never
engaging at
be
all.
the
No.
need should never be about the needs of your organization. The need should always be about what problem you're solving in the
No.
community.
It's so smart. And I think you're right. And if you're someone out there and you're like, but that is what I need money for, like maybe you do need to do some work on those values and missions and things like that to start to breathe because it is stressful to run a bit. It's very, there are a lot of things that, a lot of small businesses, a lot of nonprofits. I mean, we need money. It's like oxygen for a business. And so I
Yeah.
think that there is that. However, I think how you go out into the world, obviously if you have that that core, component, that mission that you really truly believe in, that is such a different approach than like, I need money, go to a bank, get a loan, like that. It's just different when you're looking for somebody to, to give you a grant. And so definitely such a valuable skill, and tool for people to either learn with you or start to collaborate on. So thank you so much for joining me today. This was super interesting. And I know it's kind of it might be a scary space in the nonprofit for a lot of people who maybe have been relying on federal grants and things like that. So I think it is definitely worthwhile, to reach out to you, see what else is out there. Maybe there could be other things that you could be looking at that you might not be exposed to help keep your nonprofit running. So how can people reach you, Melissa, if they want to learn more about you or follow your tips and find out more?
Absolutely. The best way to connect with me is to go to my website, melissajpond.com, and there is a great big button that says schedule a free discovery call with me. Click on that, it goes to my Calendly, and we can set up a quick 15-minute call.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. Thank you so much for getting a business started and having a business card that tells everybody everything you do exactly, because I think it's so helpful. I think people just want to know, how do you help other people? How can you
Yeah.
help me solve a problem? And so it's just great to see businesses like yours out there, because this is a big space and this is a big need. And I think you're going to be able to help a lot of people do a lot of amazing things. So thank you so much for joining me today.
Same to you, Misty. I love what you're doing and talking about money, especially for women. I was just at a conference on Friday. It was a summit, and one of the speakers said, women go to parties and we don't talk about important things. We talk about who knows what,
White
right?
Lotus
Like
or whatever. Yeah.
the latest drama, who knows what we're talking
Yeah.
about. And she's like, and if I do talk about the important stuff, she's like, I get kicked out. And I was like, that's so profound because, like, honestly, I think I've gotten kicked out of social circles because I'm wanting to talk about important things and not like drama. But those are the circles I want to sit in personally. And so I love what you're doing and I love listening to what you're doing. And just so excited. Can't wait to see you again. Hopefully, there's another Boston Business Women's Summer Bash
I
we
hope
can see
so
each other
too.
at.
Yeah, no, and I agree. I feel like, yeah, our table would probably be a lot more interesting than others, but I've been definitely at places where people are talking about like, oh, I'm getting divorced. And I was like, all right, let's talk. And I'm like going straight to that, like, let's talk about the stuff that's like really bugging. And it's like, it's amazing how people can finally sometimes be like, I needed to talk about that. This has been on my mind, but I feel like I can't say it. I can't bring it up because it's not proper or polite. So I love it. Let's talk about money. We'll talk about business. We'll talk about all the things that are keeping people, holding people back. See
Yes,
if we can help
yes.
out. So thank you again for joining. Head over to our website, melissajpond.com. And you're also on social media, right? Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn. Perfect. Well, thank you again. And if you're listening and you're thinking that you might want to start to, think about ways that you could raise money for the nonprofits, either that you care about, or if you are somebody who is charitably inclined and you want to figure out ways that you can help more people, head over to mistylynch.com. We could definitely take a look at your financial planning and some of your big goals and see how we could start making our money work better for us. So thank you again for joining, and we'll talk again next week. Don't forget to share with friends and family, and together let's demystify the world of money. Knowledge is the key to financial empowerment.